Hey everybody, Last Cat Badger here. So before I jump in, I'm going to say thank you very much to the channel members. Annette Fisher, Steve Hughes, The Abic, and Kriegsman, all four of you are in the running to see if you will win that grand prize worth $2,000. That is if the channel is able to stick around before the 30th. But if the channel doesn't exist by the 30th, then, thank y'all very much for the support. And I very much appreciate y'all's efforts. So, that being said, let's jump into it. So, we got somebody that I really like and have fun with, and it's Count Dankula. So, Count Dankula, absolute mad lads. Murder Incorporated. This should be interesting. Let's see what's happening.
We all have that one part of our job that we don't like. No matter what line of work you're in, there is always that one thing that is so tedious that it's better to hire a private contractor to do it for you. Many self-employed people hire accountants to do their finances for them, while governments hire private contractors to do pretty much everything because governments are just glorified middlemen that are allowed to steal. No matter what it is, if there is demand for something, then supply will pop up to meet it. Such is the way of the market. And believe it or not, this was also true for organised crime. In that line of work, it is very easy to make more enemies than you can handle by yourself. There was a market demand for neutral third-party contractors who could take care of people who were becoming a problem. And they pretty much operated just like a company. And by God, were they good at what they did. Murder Incorporated. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm.
I love Count Dankula's intro. Count Dankula's intro is just, it's awesome. It's just, look, y'all. There's not much else I can say. I just really do like Count Dankula's intros. I just do. I can't help that. So, that being said, let's get back to the video.
But before we get into the mad lad, today's video was brought to you by War Robots. War Robots is a game that gives you the chance to become a pilot of a huge war mech. Game to be, we have to go 50,000 silver, and returning players with an account level 15 or higher will get a free Sheriff Demeter as well as a ton of other gifts. To understand how Murder Incorporated came to be, we have to go back to 1919, when a 17-year-old upstart stepped off a freight ship onto the banks of New York City, ready to chase his American dream. To achieve this, he would go on to join a collective that pulled the strings from behind the shadows. Its famously large-nosed members were involved in pretty much every problem that you could think of. The collective's influence and corruption was so strong that it had almost all of the major institutions in its pocket. That's right. The Italian Mafia. The upstart's name was Umberto.
It seems like the biggest, guys in the organized game ever in the history of ever was the Italian mob. Why is that? That's something I'd be kind of curious to figure out. Because, think about it. You don't hear about the Russian mob that often. You don't hear too much about the Irish mob or the Scottish or anything else. You hear more about the Italian mafia than you do anybody else in U.S. history. I wonder why that is. I'm kind of curious as to why they were so much bigger compared to everybody else. That'd be really interesting to find out. And if somebody knows, then please tell me in the comments down below.
So Anastasia, and he was one twisted bastard. Anastasia wasted no time in taking over New York's waterfront and the dock workers' unions through sheer ruthlessness, intimidation, and his signature weapon, an ice pick. However, despite his sheer potential, Anastasia was still young and had a lot to learn, including how to cover his tracks.
And that's always, that's a kicker, right? That's always a kicker. When it comes to anyone who comes to prominence in some very notorious or infamous way, they had all the energy to do what they've done and the intelligence and experience and stuff to do what they've done when they could have just as easily done something good instead. That's the consistent and ever-present conundrum of humanity. There are those who just default to evil, or are driven to evil, or led to evil. They do bad stuff. And then there are those who are good. Maybe, as unfortunate as it sounds, maybe we need that kind of balance to keep humanity somewhat evened out. Because if we don't know what evil is, we don't know what bad stuff is, how it makes us feel, react, what it does to others, how could you possibly be able to even comprehend what good is? Or am I just making it too simplified? Y'all tell me. But it's very interesting how a lot of these guys that come up this way, they could have done so much better doing something else, but they instead did this. You know what I mean?
In March of 1921, at the age of only 19, Anastasia was handed a death sentence for the murder of his biggest rival. While in Sing Sing prison, Anastasia managed to make a name for himself by doing what he did best: being a violent maniac. Fortunately for Anastasia, but maybe not for the rest of the world, his ruthlessness caught the attention of a mobster named Lucky Luciano, who saw the young convict's potential and managed to get him a new trial. But how would this have helped Anastasia? He was a murderer. He did it. He got caught. All of the evidence was there to send Anastasia straight to the chair. However, in a strange turn of events, all of the witnesses that condemned Anastasia during his first trial suddenly changed their stories, or they simply vanished.
Good old jury rigging. Good old jury rigging. Even today, people who are put on jury duty and stuff, and even our courts and judges are not as safe as people think they are. Nowhere near as safe as people think they are. Even today. You would think we would have gotten better at securing our legal system and our court system, and also, enforcing nonpartisan appointees and nonpartisan participation in the court system. But we're not too much better off than we were 80 plus years ago. We really aren't.
And without their testimony, the murder charge just went away. Man, that's really strange. I wonder what happened. Anastasia was now a free man, and he repaid Luciano for saving his life by working for him as a hitman. From this point onwards, Anastasia would go out with his trusty ice pick and do what he did best: Anastasia's brutality while working for Luciano led to him becoming more feared than ever. But his reputation still didn't make him immune from getting caught. Anastasia still kept getting hit with murder charges.
Which you'd think would cause a bit of a problem. You would think that they would teach him a thing or two. Unless he was like, a useful idiot. And that's totally different. If he was just like a useful idiot who has like that doggedly loyal determination to him, then yeah, someone could just be like, you know what? I can use this guy. I can use this guy. He's dumb as a bag of hammers, but he hits like a hammer. So, yeah, he could be useful in that way. Huh.
However, he now had friends in high places, so none of the charges stuck. Thanks to Luciano, witnesses kept refusing to testify or they simply disappeared. The bastard was practically untouchable, and as Luciano worked his way up in the Mafia's ranks, Anastasia was climbing right up there along with him.
This story actually sounds kind of familiar. This sounds very familiar. Wait a minute. This sounds kind of similar to. Boondock Saints. That's what this sounds like. No, the second one, Boondock Saints 2, it was okay. It was okay. It wasn't as good as the first one. I don't think anybody could dispute that. But it was okay. I liked it still. It was pretty funny. I should have become a lawyer. But yeah, good movie. But the plot of the movie is like, it's like, a guy they call the old man. He's like pulling the strings behind something going on, and the old man turned out to be, the boy's father's like friend who used him like a tool to further his career inside, organized crime, and then just left him to rot in like a prison or whatever. So yeah, it sounds very similar to this. But somebody fact check me on that. Somebody who's seen the movie more recently than I have. I haven't seen it in over a decade now. Someone who's seen it more recently than me, please comment down below if the plot of the movie, like the simplified plot of it, about those two characters, sounds very similar to this, or at least it does to me.
Until the time eventually came for Anastasia to really prove his worth. As you know, organised crime was extremely profitable during the Prohibition era. So much so that in 1930, a mob boss named Salvatore Maranzano decided he wanted a bigger piece of the pie. So he started a war against Luciano's boss, Joe Masiria. The conflict became known as the Castellammares War, and it quickly got so out of hand that Luciano himself decided to do something about it, because two warring bosses were extremely bad for business and the war was bringing far too much police attention.
And this is something that like so I got a few friends who are in law enforcement, or they work with law enforcement, and I've worked with law enforcement myself, just in a different capacity than they have, and the bigger organized crime is not as much of a big, huge concern to a certain extent. Okay, So like how it was explained to me by somebody, a few people I know, is that there's a few different kinds of crime organizations, um, that they just want to do their business, and they try to stay under the radar and just do things without causing issues to the public, except for maybe, drugs cause issues, but whatever. Okay, they look at it like a business thing. Okay, not saying it's good or nothing, but those types of organizations would try to keep things clean so they can continue to do business. And then there was organizations that were just straight up cruel, ambitious, and just straight up evil people. A lot like the cartels. There's not just one big giant cartel. There's a multitude of cartels, all with conflicting interests. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they come together to make a big one. Sometimes they break apart and then they have a war or something. Those cartels, those crime organizations are a much bigger danger, to the general public and stuff, and general safety, health, and welfare of the country than like those cleaner, organized crime organizations. And then there's the third ones, where they're basically like the Joker, except they're not as clever as the Joker. They just want to see stuff burn. They think they're sticking it to the dude, and they just do stuff to do stuff, and that's it. Those are the ones that are pretty much the most dangerous. Either they have some kind of like hardcore ideology, or they're like the okay, mass shooters are an example of this. These people that do this, they're doing it, basically just to do it and to get their name in the papers and to cause the most damage to the world as possible. Those are the most dangerous elements, and anyone and anything that's similar to them. That's at least how it was explained to me by a few people I know that are LEO of some kind. But maybe it was just their interpretation. Hopefully I made that make sense. If not, then please let me know. Or if you're law enforcement of a different stripe or the same stripe as them, I can't tell you who they are because, privacies and stuff and certain other things. But yeah, let me know if you're in law enforcement of any kind. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let's continue the video.
Which could have ended up bringing down the entire mafia. On the 15th of April 1931, Luciano made a deal with Maranzano and turned on his own boss. Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis and Bugsy Siegel, all of whom went on to become very high-profile gangsters in their own right, gunned down Miseria in a restaurant under Luciano's orders. Then, after this event, Maranzano crowned himself the boss of all bosses and had a huge celebration. And then Luciano had him killed as well. For that particular hit, Luciano's hitmen were disguised as the most evil, terrifying and grotesque boogeymen of them all.
Oh, brother. What's the saying? Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, or something like that. But, man, just... This shit's convoluted. It's severely convoluted.
IRS agents. The Castellamarise War was such a shit show.
Oh, shit. Oh, damn. He said, he said, IRS agents. Oh, damn. Well, they did take down quite a few very powerful people, so he's not wrong. Then again, the IRS is the biggest mafia on the planet. Don't believe me? Look it up.
That Luciano had to make sure that nothing like it could ever happen again. So instead of just taking all of the power for himself, he restructured the Italian mob into the Commission, led by the heads of the newly established 5 families. This new system of sharing power ensured that leadership disputes were avoided, business stayed civil, and the money could keep flowing in unimpeded.
Actually, this is kind of genius. This is pretty genius, actually. Think about it. Think about it. If okay, let's take somebody like the President of the United States, okay? The head of state, right? Instead of there just being one president, what if there were like, I don't know how you would do it for the US, but let's just say there were like five, main representatives for the whole United States, right? That controlled the executive branch, okay? Then that would mean that not any one party could take wholly the blame, and not any one party could not take blame. Okay, that made more sense in my head. Caveman. CTE. Too many IEDs. But think about it. Like, if there's more people that are at the top, then you can't really blame one single person and focus any animosity, hatred, anger, rage, blame on one single individual unless they really royally mess up and do something the rest of the council or the rest of the group has no idea about whatsoever, and it can be, whatever. We're getting into like the other part of that. But this is actually pretty genius, because then it also puts equal standing on the other members of that council, right? Each one of them is a family. And each one of them has a say in how things go. And if they get outvoted, then at least, the immediate thing is like, okay, there was an attempt to do this, but everybody else didn't agree. So it's not just on me or you or them. Okay, we all have to accept the decision of the group, which is pretty genius, or at least in my thinking. And this is how some cartels operate as well. They have multiple different heads of the same organization. They are like they're like a hydra. Okay, you take out one head, another one grows in its place, probably replaced by somebody that's in their part of the organization already, or they're part of the cartel. Or they get absorbed by another member, and then another cartel gets invited to this cartel. Anyway, okay, you know what? I'm rambling. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm rambling. My brain is going through like how interesting it is that he thought this through. So it sounds pretty good to me.
After all, it was a lot better to work together instead of just constantly killing each other. From the ashes of the former chain of command also rose the National Crime Syndicate, which was a coalition of mobs from across the United States. As the syndicate formed, the Italians joined up with allies in one of the other factions in the criminal underworld, the Jewish Mafia. With Jewish mobsters Bugsy Siegel and Mayor Lansky playing founding roles alongside Luciano, the syndicate was mainly Jewish-Italian.
I completely forgot about the Jewish mob. And I forgot all about Bugsy Siegel. Oh damn. Oh damn. I completely forgot about them guys. Then again, like the Italian mob was way even bigger. That's a question in my head. Like why was the Italian mob so much larger than everybody else? Like so much bigger and more powerful. Why was that? Or did it just seem like that? Somebody let me know.
But there was also some minor representation of the Irish, African American and Polish mobs. To fulfill its role in mediating between crime families and eliminating potential threats, the syndicate needed enforcers. The Jewish mafioso Louis Lepke Buchalter was put in charge of assembling an outfit that would get its hands dirty on the syndicate's behalf. A third-party corporation, if you will, that offered its services to all 5 of the families, while at the same time remaining completely neutral. They were on no one's side. They performed a service, and that was it. And
Like a lot of companies nowadays should be. Looking at y'all, the big giant woke companies of the USA. Look, y'all know my stance on this, or at least you probably should by now. Non-partisanship. Okay? Don't buy into either one ideology or the freaking other. Just sell shit to us. Stop trying to shove shit down our throats we don't want. Okay? And this is one thing that gets me hung up on a lot of people. Okay? Is that they're like, oh, well, they should do this because it's right. And I'm like, okay, you sound like a Nazi. No, that's not what they did. Really? Really? How about you read about the policies of the National Socialist Party of Germany and how they ran the country and how they made companies run the country. And then you tell me that you don't sound exactly like them. A company shouldn't do shit but sell products to the rest of us. They shouldn't be trying to cater to nobody. They shouldn't be trying to follow one ideology or the other. No. Just sell your stuff. Okay? Oh my lord. Just sell your stuff. Anyway, sorry. I'm going to rant a lot, so if you want to turn it off at this point, I don't blame you. The channel's probably going to be dead in like 22 days. July 30th. I'm bad at math, whatever. Let's keep going.
who better to serve as Lepke's right-hand man in such an endeavour than Anastasia? Lepke had gotten his start by extorting pushcart owners before taking over the garment industry, in much the same way as Anastasia took over the waterfront, and because it was the 1920s, he'd also jumped on the bootlegging and gambling bandwagon. The two partners very quickly proved to be just as dangerous and ruthless as each other, and they went on to become good friends.
Really? I thought that Anastasia would just use this dude up and then just toss him aside. That's what I thought, but they became friends? What was I saying about friends close and enemies closer? Are they really friends?
However, while they made a formidable team, they couldn't carry out all of the Commission's hits by themselves. There was just far too many. Luckily, they knew just the guys for the job. The Brownsville boys, who were not shy when it came to killing. At this point in time, the neighbourhood of Brownsville in Brooklyn was the territory of the Shapiro brothers, Mayor, Irving and Willie, who were going to absolutely wreck their targets with facts and logic. However,
I was just about to mention. Damn it, Count! You beat me to it. Damn it, gang! You beat me to it. I was just about to be like, wait, is there any relation to Ben Shapiro? Because if there is, it may or may not explain some things. So yeah. Probably no relation though. These guys like lived out in what, like the Midwest and the East. Ben Shapiro's family has been in the West Coast for freaking ever. Then again, they probably had some Jewish in them, and Shapiro is apparently a very common Jewish name, I think. Somebody fact check me on this. I'm just talking out of my butt at this point. So yeah. But that would be funny. Destroy them with their facts and logic. Okay, gang. Okay, gang. Just listen up. Listen up. That's wrong. I'm right. My wife's a doctor.
However, they weren't exactly the best guys to work for, and a number of their underlings got a little bit disgruntled with the fact that they were the ones risking their necks every day while the Shapiros watched from their ivory towers. One such underling was Abe Kid Twist Reles, who decided he was going to do something about this. Reles assembled some of his colleagues and teamed up with a couple of Italian mobsters, and then went after the Shapiro brothers, though not with facts and logic, but with, firearms. Mayer survived 19 assassination attempts, and he even tried to fight back. Irving was not so lucky and took 8 bullets to the chest. Then the Brownsville boys kidnapped Mayer from a speakeasy in Manhattan and brought him to a basement in the Lower East Side, where Reles shot him dead. And then 3 years later, they killed Willie.
So the usual, mob shenanigans. Let's continue.
After killing the Shapiros and meeting Anastasia, the Brownsville boys and their new Italian friends continued to work together as the Syndicate and the Commission's go-to hit squad, and they were known as the Combination. Lepke's longtime partner, Jacob Gura Shapiro, was put in charge of recruiting and training even more assassins. Before long, the Commission had a pool of 250 hitmen to choose from, with Lepke managing the Jews and Anastasia, who was now nicknamed the Lord High Executioner, in charge of the Italians.
Oh man, that's just, I don't know. Oh, man, just the kind of names I hear from back then. The High Executioner. Sounds like something from Dungeons and Dragons. Like,
but 250 hitmen is far too many to keep track of, so let's just focus on a roster of the key players. On the Jewish side, we have Lepke's number 2, Abe Kid Twist Reles, who was so good with the ice pick that he was actually able to make it look like his victims died of a brain hemorrhage by shoving it into their ears. But as fast as he could dispatch his enemies, he also liked to take his time with a good torture session before burying his target alive.
some pretty gruesome stuff. But then again, these are like what they call heavy hitters we're talking about, right? But an ice pick through the ear. Just a... Like, I barely have a good time, like, using a Q-tip on, like, just the outer part of the ear. I can't imagine someone shoving something in there. Cringe.
Joining him for several of the 80-ish murders that Relly has committed was fellow Brownsville boy Martin Bugsy Goldstein. There was also the Jews' heaviest hitter, Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, who had been a murderer since he was a teenager. This sick fuck loved killing so much that he was only ever off duty when he was busy putting his other ice pick in prostitutes.
A sick colero. A sick colero. Indeed. Probably literally.
During his 100 jobs with the combination, he got to really enjoy taking out his victims in creative ways, including drowning and choking them. Many of Strauss's hits were out of town, and one thing that he liked to do is the next day after carrying out the hit, before he went home, he would buy a newspaper so he could see how much the public enjoyed his work.
News media strikes again. You know, we would have a lot less of like, what do you call it? It's escaping me now. Basically where someone does something just to gain notoriety. They want their name out there. They want everybody to know what they did. They want to be infamous. I forget what that is called. But we would have a lot less of those if the news media would just not release the names of whoever it was or obfuscate what happened. That would be the kind of disinformation and misinformation that I would be on board with. You know why? Because if they're like, oh, well, multiple shooters suspect, it is our opinion that there might have been multiple shooters or something like that. They could be like, if there was just one mass shooter, they could be like, shooting at school, this many injured, this many dead, but leave the person that did it completely out of the news cycle. That would absolutely just... It would greatly help, because if they are unable to accomplish their objective, and other people who come into that similar way of thinking, or that similar sickness, whatever you want to call it, they're going to be like, wait, so nobody's going to know who I am if I do this? They might think twice. And that's just one thing out of many multitudes of things we could do, right? Anyway, let's get back to the story.
Rounding out the squad was Lepke's top guy, Mendy Weiss, who was also influential in the drug trade and garment rackets when he wasn't busy shanking people with an ice pick. Also, just a little fun fact to...
What is it with everybody in ice picks? Like... What is it with everybody in ice picks? Seriously. What is it with everybody in the ice picks? What is it? Is there some kind of draw from it or something? I don't know. Y'all let me know what you think it is. Why so many of these guys chose an ice pick instead of something else?
To explain why there were so many Jews involved in the hitman business is all because of police profiling. Police profiled Italians like fuck because of the mafia. So let's say that there was some gunshots heard down the street and the police seen an Italian guy running away from it. The police would grab him because they would have assumed he done it. Whereas if the police saw a Jew running away from it, they would just assume that he was running because he was scared, because he heard some gunshots. So the reason Jews were used so much is because they aroused less suspicion, which is why Jews made such good hitmen. Not to be outdone in the savagery department, the Italians had some violent psychos of their own, including those that had helped the Brownsville boys with their Shapiro problem. Harry Happy Maione and Frank Dasher Abandando. Like Strauss, Maione volunteered for every job he could get his hands on just for the love of killing. However, he didn't get his nickname because of how much he enjoyed his job, but because he was a miserable bastard. A lot of Italian mob nicknames are ironic. Like, someone would be called Handsome Tony, but he was actually an ugly fuck. Speaking of nicknames, Abandando got his epithet because of the way he once beat the shit out of another mobster with a baseball bat. Abandando had a preference for melee weapons because they were quieter. There was also the man that got the ball rolling on this whole thing by introducing the Brownsville boys to Anastasia, a man called Louis Capone. No relation. Despite carrying out his fair share of hits, Capone was less of a hitman and more of a mediator between factions in the mob, essentially making him Murder Incorporated's HR manager. He was also in charge of allocating the jobs to the other hitmen once the orders from Lepke and Anastasia came in. And then finally, there was Charles the Bug Workman, who liked to make a little extra cash on the side by going through the pockets of his victims after killing them. Sometimes it also helped to throw the police off by making the hit look like a mugging that went badly. The combination was headquartered in a candy store named Midnight Rose in Saratoga Avenue in Brooklyn, where a bunch of terrifying, insane, hard-as-nails hitmen would hang out 24/7 while being served by the proprietor, a sweet little 60-year-old woman named Rosie Gold. She was probably the safest small business owner in all of New York.
Kind of reminds me of the bar owner guy from Boondock Saints, who had like a weird mixed mash of like Tourette's or whatever, and he would always like just remembering the parts of those movies. F arse. Or he would try to say like he would he would be like, well, you know, there's one part of the movie where he's like, you should make like a 3 and JTFO. And it just wasn't. And he just made no sense. Oh man. Oh man. You should make like a tree in GTFO. Or there's another one he tried to say. He would be like, there was another, I don't know. He had a weird mixed match of like Tourette's and something else where he would try to say like, he would try to, you know, say sayings, like old sayings, and he would mix them up. You know, make like a tree in GTFO. Such a good movie. If you ain't seen Boondock Saints, y'all should. You really should.
When they weren't out on a job, the Khazars and the Cannolis hung out at Midnight Rose in shifts while keeping an ear out for the row of payphones at the back of the shop, where they would get their orders from. In the meantime, for the arduous, grueling task of sitting on their arses and drinking coffee all day, the hitmen were paid a retainer salary of around $125 per week, plus benefits for their families.
What is that, like $25,000 a week today or something crazy? Here, let me look it up. This is like in the 1920s, I believe. Let me look this up. Let me shmee. How much is... Let me shmee. Okay, not as much as I thought. So $125 in 1920 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $1,826 today. So these dudes are making $1,800 a week per just to hang around until they got their next hit. Let's see, let's do some maths with the handy dandy calculator. They made $7,200 a month. And then probably per hit. I wonder how much it was per hit. If it was like, $300 per hit or something like that. Bub. These dudes were making bank.
When they had to do some real work, however, the hitmen could expect a fee of $1,000 to $5,000 for each job, which at the time, that's a huge amount of money.
Whoa, 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 whoa. It was way more than I thought. Let's look this up. Let's look. I got the handy dandy, I got the magic tool of destiny here. Let's look this up. Okay. That's over 70 grand in today's money. That's 70 grand. So they were making like $1,800 a week just to sit there and be on standby. But they made 70 grand per hit. And if they have like, 4 hits in like a month, 7 twice 14, 14 twice is 20. That was 280,000 a freaking month if they did like 4 hits a month. You know what? I'm going to say it. Nobody's going to like it. Sounds like crime pays. Sounds like crime pays. Until crime pays you.
The mob also provided them with the best lawyers that money could buy. And they also paid off judges if they get caught. So when the phone rang and an assignment came in, what happened next? Well, there was a strict process for every hit that ensured no one would get caught. One guy would be hired to steal a getaway car, another would be responsible for getting all of the weapons needed for the job, and then another would point out the target to the hitmen who were going to kill him. For good measure, even more guys were put in charge of swapping the license plates of the cars they used to throw the police off their scent, and a legally obtained car would be bought to accidentally ram or get in the way of pursuing police cars to buy the hitmen more time to escape. After the job was done, the weapons and the cars that the hitmen used would be destroyed. Now, I know that you're probably thinking that that whole game plan sounds convoluted, but that was by design. The most important part of the whole plan was that all of these orders were given out on a strict need-to-know basis. Each man involved in the operation was only given enough information to be able to do his task. So say, for example, you were the guy that was to swap the license plate on a car. That was all you knew. Go to this location, swap the license plate, and that was it. You had no idea why you were doing it. You had no idea what the car was going to be used for. You had no idea who was going to be driving the car. All you knew was swap the license plate. That way, everyone had plausible deniability. Or, if someone got caught, they couldn't rat out the other guys so that they could get a more lenient sentence. Since you can't hand over information that you don't know. Even in the worst case scenario.
Which is, there's equivalent of this to the government, and it's called compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is essentially where, there are organizations that have organizations that the organizations don't even know that they have as an organization. Or there are agencies that have branches that other branches don't even know exist as a branch to their branches. See how this keeps going? So, I bet a lot of people don't even know that the NSA has its own strike team. Basically, the NSA has their own kind of SWAT. A lot of people didn't probably know this, did they? They just thought that the NSA was just a bunch of nerds that did information gathering. They got their own. They got their own action arm. But a lot of people don't know this because it's pretty heavily compartmentalized, or it was until recently. But it was like I'm trying to remember how it was released. But essentially, it was made available for public disclosure a little bit ago, I believe. But even to this day, like almost nobody even knows that they exist. And they exist. How I know? I've worked with some of them. And I've met a few of them. I've got a pretty good sense for spooks, is what we call them. And they truly are spooks. But yeah, so yeah, stuff like that. Or contractors that do any type of people refer to them as black ops, but I don't know if I can even say that or not. Okay, we'll just leave it at black ops, okay? A huge amount that do those types of jobs, okay? Their organization that they're working for is not even aware that they exist. That's called compartmentalization. Or that's like a facet of it. Different types of compartmentalization is like what they do in top secret research projects, where one team doesn't know what another team is working on and never goes into their areas either. That's another form of it. But anyway.
All you had to do to protect yourself and your colleagues was keep your mouth shut until the commission made everything go away. Also, to avoid being connected to their crimes, the hitmen almost never knew their victims personally, and they were told nothing about who ordered the hits or why the hit was being ordered. Whenever they got a hit, they wouldn't even know which family had ordered it. However, they could probably guess what the motives were from some of the instructions they were given with their orders. Rats or birds would be stuffed in the mouths of snitches because they had sung like canaries, and targets were castrated if they had been up to any funny business with another mobster's wife, sister or daughter. Witnesses that were about to talk in court often had their eyes shot out or gouged out because see no evil and all of that other symbolic stuff. But all of this wasn't just...
Sounds more and more like Boondock Saints the more I listen to it. It really does. It sounds more and more like Boondock Saints the more I listen to this story. Because, like, if you remember from the movie, or if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's a good freaking... The first one's really good. They would take coins and put them in the eyes of the people they hit. As kind of like, something for, like, old beliefs, essentially, to summarize that as much as I can. Yeah, like they would say like a prayer or something, before they executed their hits. This sounds very much like that.
Just about tying up loose ends. The combination's biggest job, its primary role, was preventing and suppressing gang wars by forcing would-be warmongers to the negotiation table. Sure, a boss could take on a rival family, but the wrath of the commission was just too big a risk. However, there was always someone who thought that they were clever and they would start the occasional gang scuffle. And then the combination would finish it by killing everyone involved and installing new leadership with better sensibilities. If you weren't part of the commission, either you played ball or they made a phone call. As you can tell by the way the combination treated troublemakers, much in the same way the US treats the Middle East, the job wasn't just about killing. It was also about sending a message. And the message was always abundantly clear because these guys were fucking brutal. Guns and the iconic ice picks were usually the go-to weapons, but certain hitmen also made liberal use of meat cleavers, their bare hands, and even fire. Bodies were often left in public places and set up as a warning to others, such as one time when one victim was left strapped to a slot machine. However, not every corpse was turned into a message. In many cases, victims' bodies simply vanished because back in those days, a body was needed to get a murder conviction. No body? Then you can't be accused of murder. The combination also disappeared the corpses of guys that they particularly disliked to prevent them from having a funeral and also to prevent their families from getting life insurance payouts, since back then it took several years for missing persons to be declared dead. The combination's MO was so airtight that the organisation ran like a well-oiled machine, and they could even get away with carrying out hits in broad daylight. One of the craziest things about the combination was even though they worked for the five families, they were considered a whole different separate organisation that was neutral. So, if one of the five families, let's say the Lucianos, hired the combination to kill a member of another of the five families, let's say the Maranzanos, if the Maranzanos wanted revenge for that, they would also call the combination, and they might even be talking to the guy who killed one of their own, and then hire that same guy to go and kill a Luciano. That's what made this relationship so weird. If you were a member of the five families, the combination might have killed your father, son, brother, friends, whoever. But then, to get revenge, you would hire these exact same people who had killed your loved ones. It was never held against them. It was this weird thing where nothing at all was blamed on the man who pulled the trigger.
Nothing personal. It's just business. And it seems quite literally true in this case.
It was all blamed on whoever had ordered the hit. You know, to bust out the old cliche mob saying, nothing personal, it's just business. The combinations
I just said that.
efficiency and brutality made them infamous very quickly, which led to the press dubbing them Murder Incorporated. They were so efficient that they caught the attention of mobsters in other districts of New York and even as far away as Detroit and LA. Now, when other mobsters start noticing you because you've been killing a lot of important people in the criminal underworld, it's pretty safe to say that some very bad shit is about to go down. And it did. An absolute bloodbath ensued.
And of course, when you get too powerful, where everybody feels like they're threatened, everybody comes together to try to take you down. We saw that with the Knights Templar. You know, the Knights Templar became too big and too influential. So somebody who wanted to get out of debt, you know, got the church to declare them, you know, bad guys and have them exterminated. This is a classic, just a tale as old as time, essentially, at this point.
Because all of these other mobsters started hiring Murder Incorporated. Look, they were essentially mercenaries. You know, business is business. Murder Incorporated was a great success, and in 1935 it was time for their first test. District Attorney Thomas Dewey had the potential to be a real thorn in the syndicate's side because he was absolutely hell-bent on taking down the mob. Anastasia, Jacob Shapiro, and a fellow mobster in Dewey's crosshairs named Dutch Schultz decided that he needed to be dealt with. And, as always, Dutch had a plan. Dutch asked the commission to sanction a hit on Dewey, while Anastasia staked out Dewey's apartment to learn his morning routine, avoiding detection by walking with a pram and pretending to be a dad just walking his baby. However, the commission was not impressed with this display of initiative and told Anastasia to back off. While the commission was anything but shy when it came to having opponents killed, they felt like they had no choice but to leave Dewey alone. Murdering a bookie for skimming a little off the top, well, that was just child's play. But murdering a district attorney, that would put a massive target on the backs of the entire mob. And sorting out a minor nuisance just really was not worth that kind of heat. Dutch, however, was not happy to hear this. He really wanted Dewey dead because the crusading DA had Dutch by the Achilles heel of every mobster. Tax evasion. Understandably, Dutch was not letting this go. So he decided to carry out the hit by himself. However, before Dutch could carry out his plan that would jeopardise everyone, Lepke decided to play the Uno reverse card and have Dutch killed instead. Jacob Shapiro and Anastasia still disagreed on this course of action, but orders were orders. And Dutch was about to become a case study in what would happen to you if you defied the syndicate's orders. Dewey very famously hated Dutch, so the syndicate assumed that having Dutch killed would not only prevent the headache of dealing with the aftermath of a murdered prosecutor, but also make Dewey kind of happy enough to back off of them a little bit. It was a big gamble, and on the 3rd of October 1935, Lepke sent Workman and Weiss to kill Dutch, who was at a restaurant in New Jersey with an accountant and 2 bodyguards. The assassins entered the restaurant from the back, while Dutch was in the bathroom, where Workman shot him in the chest. Dutch's 3 friends were then killed in a shootout as Weiss and Workman hauled arse out of the restaurant through the front door. Allegedly, Dutch didn't feel like dying in the bathroom, so he staggered back into the dining room. He then sat down and asked for medical attention. He was given brandy for the pain until medics arrived. However, he was pronounced dead 22 hours later. Before the medical help arrived, Weiss made a beeline for the getaway car while Workman stupidly went back inside the restaurant to rifle through the pockets of Dutch and his men. Weiss got impatient and Workman's bullshit was going to get all of them caught, so he ordered the driver to put the foot down and leave Workman behind. Workman was so angry about having to walk all the way back home to New York that he asked Anastasia and Lepka to have Weiss killed. Now, that may sound like a massive overreaction, but ditching a colleague like that is a very big no-no in mafia circles. However, the bosses refused because they didn't want to lose one of their best hitmen, and let's be honest, Workman brought it on himself. He was there to kill Dutch, not rob him. You don't murder 4 people and then hang around. You get the fuck out of there immediately. And that was the exact defence that got Weiss off the hook. Not long after the hit, the syndicate began to reap the results of their audacious murder of Dutch. Unfortunately, they really began to wish that they had just let Dutch kill Dewey, because their plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of taking the win and backing off, Dewey instead doubled the fuck down and ramped up his efforts in nailing Luciano and Lepke. Luciano was convicted on forced prostitution charges and eventually managed to weasel his way into being deported to Italy. He was just deported to Italy. That was it. Have you been to Italy? I had my honeymoon in Italy. It's fucking beautiful. That's not a punishment. Hey, I raped the women and was sentenced to cook the pizza. Baba de booba de spaghetti Ferrari. Wahoo!
Oh shoot. Oh shoot. This does sound like Boondock Saints. No, man. Oh, brother. Just the ridiculousness.
Downfall of Luciano. Lepke became very paranoid and started ordering hits left and right to tie up some loose ends and to make sure that his number didn't come up next. In September of 1936, a candy store owner named Joseph Rosen entered Lepke's crosshairs. Lepke had forced Rosen out of his own trucking business in the garment industry, which Lepke held with an iron fist. This left Rosen bankrupt and, understandably, very unhappy with being screwed over. Rosen then refused to be bullied any further and defied Lepke's order to leave town. For good measure, Rosen also threatened to get revenge by exposing Lepke's racketeering to the authorities.
Why'd you just say that?
He told Lepke he was going to snitch on him. If there was ever a list of things that you do not say to the mob, that would be at the very fucking top of it.
Bub, you don't threaten to do it. You just do it. Don't make a threat. Just do it. Just do it.
Lepke obviously couldn't let a threat like that slide, And when the order came in, Capone, no relation, did what he did best and, along with Strauss and Weiss, gunned down Rosen in his own shop. Despite Lepke's efforts, he and Jacob Shapiro found themselves convicted on racketeering charges. Luckily, however, they were tipped off about the indictments, so they were able to go into hiding, which didn't deter Dewey at all. He continued his crusade and managed to get heroin importation charges added to Lepke's rap sheet, a $5,000 price on his head, and a shitload of media attention. However, Anastasia didn't make it easy for Dewey and got rid of a dozen witnesses against Lepke, while also taking over leadership of Murder Incorporated in Lepke's absence. While in hiding, Lepke continued to use Murder Incorporated to cover his tracks. One such hit occurred in May of 1937 when Reles, Maione and Abendando were dispatched to deal with a fellow mobster named Whitey Rudnick for allegedly being seen with a Fed. Now, if there's anything that mobsters hate more than the law, it's rats. And Rudnick was treated accordingly. They say that snitches get stitches, but I don't think that a needle and thread could have made much difference to him after what they did to him. Rudnick was brutally tortured and stabbed 63 times with an ice pick before Maione delivered the coup de grace to his head with a meat cleaver. Rudnick's body was then left in the back of a stolen car. Now, that was pretty heavy, so how about a lighter story, or as light as a Mafia hit can get anyway? Lepke was having some problems with the Plasterers Union because a few of its members felt like they shouldn't have to pay kickbacks to the mob. Naturally, Lepke did not like this and ordered two union members, Cesare Lataro and Antonio Siciliano, to kill one of the more vocal opponents of his within the union. And they failed catastrophically. The amateurs cornered their mark at a party on the 2nd of February 1939, but he was screaming so loudly as they garroted him that they had to give up and escape. Lataro and Siciliano knew that their shoddy attempt at a hit would not have gone down well with Murder Incorporated, who were about to show both of them how the pros do it. So Lataro and Siciliano became extremely vigilant to avoid retribution. But to be completely fair, how stupid can you get? Right, if you were going to do it with a gun at a party, whatever, that's fine. You're in 2 seconds, you're out. But you were going to garrote him. You were going to strangle him at a party. Like, that takes like at least about like 6 minutes. 10 if you want to make sure the job's done. Right, what did you think? Did you think that it was a party? Did you think no one would notice?
He's right about the whole gun thing. Like, you're in, 2 seconds, takes only a second or less to pull the trigger, and then you get out. There you go. Done. I mean, if you truly want to quickly silence somebody, wait, actually, actually, no, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. But there are other ways to do it very quietly and end it very, very quickly. And these guys, for some reason, they took a wire or a rope or something and tried to do that instead. Do you know how much force you need to make sure that they are completely quiet? You need a lot. A huge amount. Like, you better be strong enough to rip and almost like split log in half to do it that well. Oh, man.
Murder Incorporated knew that the plasterers would not be easy to get to. So they had to think outside the box in order to get them to drop their guard. Luckily, Lautaro and Siciliano had a weakness that would prove fatal. And it's very often a fatal weakness of most men. Women. You see, Prohibition-era pussy got them acting unwise, which Murder Incorporated decided to use to their advantage. So how did they do this? Did they hire a female associate to seduce Lautaro and Siciliano and then kill them in their sleep, or poison them while they were out on a date? Did they maybe play the long game and set them up with the loves of their lives who they would go on to dedicate their entire lives to until the marriages crumble, the love fades, and one day their wives leave and take their money, house, kids, leaving behind nothing but shattered hearts, crippling debt, and a Colt 45. No, they just dressed one of the hitmen up like a woman. After a female mutual friend of the mob and the plasterers set up a blind date, Abendando, Happy Maione and an associate named Vito Giurino were selected for the job.
Which, the last part of what he was saying earlier, facts. Absolute facts. Don't get married. Don't get married to an American woman. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. It is not worth it. Yeah. Unless you find that needle in the haystack, but there's so few and far in between, why are you even going to bother? Just go somewhere where there's a stack of needles to pick from. Like, I don't know, somewhere in Asia or South America or something.
Maione was selected because of his height and the fact that he was deemed the most feminine looking of the hitmen, which made him the perfect candidate for this undercover operation. However, the men couldn't turn Maione into a convincing lady by themselves, which is where Giurino came in. He had a wife named Gertrude, who was kind enough to let the hitmen raid her wardrobe and pick out a nice, cute outfit for Maione's date on the 6th of February. Equipped with a white blouse, blue skirt, some very nice heels, a fur wrap, some lipstick and a dump truck arse, Maione knocked on the door of Siciliano and Lautaro's apartment, which Siciliano excitedly opened. And then realised too late that it was a literal trap. While Maione was very happy to see Siciliano, that was actually a .38 revolver in his pocket. As Maione drew his gun, Abendando and Giurino burst through the door and the trio shot Siciliano dead. Abendando then rocked up to Lautaro's bedroom and put 2 in his head while he was sleeping. How the hell he managed to sleep through all of those gunshots, I have absolutely no idea, but he paid for it dearly. The hit was a success, but you know what happens when you and the boys are enjoying a night out on the town with a pretty femboy. There is always that one dickhead that takes things too far and ruins the night for everyone. Giurino shot Siciliano's bulldog. For this sheer act of barbarism, Giurino was absolutely savaged by the press. Not for the double homicide, but for shooting a dog. Yeah, the public basically went, look, I can excuse the brutal murder, but who the fuck shoots a dog? That dog was a good boy that did nothing wrong. Even Giurino's colleagues in the Mafia were not fucking happy. They were absolutely appalled. They were like, what do you mean you shot the dog, you sick fuck? Italians.
Italians. That's awesome. That's freaking awesome. But no, the poor pupper. The poor dog. But there is a point there. There is a point there. Oh, nobody cares about the double homicide. Now they just care about the dog. Oh, shoot. Oh, shoot. But facts. effects. And that carries on today, doesn't it? People would rather have like, dogs and live alone than like have somebody else in their own house. I wonder what that is, though. I wonder what is it because good boys are good boys or good girls are good girls, or is it like something else that's going on, like humanity's best friend or something? I wonder what that is.
It's nice to know that even in a world as violent, nihilistic, and utterly depraved as the Mafia, man's best friend is still sacred. However, this was just another of many hits carried out by Murder Incorporated, which only ramped up more and more as the cops tightened the net. And Lepke and Anastasia were trying to get rid of anyone who could jeopardise their freedom. The bodies were starting to pile high. By June of 1940, there were over 200 unsolved murders on Dewey's plate, and he seemed to be fighting a losing battle. However, while Murder Incorporated was doing just fine, the cracks under the surface were starting to show. The syndicate was getting nervous. Lepke's fugitive status had made him a liability because of all of the police and media attention on him. So, he had to be sacrificed. The syndicate asked Anastasia to get Lepke to turn himself in. Soon after, Anastasia went to his old friend Lepke, saying that he'd brokered a deal with the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. If Lepke surrendered to him, then he would go away on a lesser charge, but the syndicate would keep him safe from being charged with murder. Go away for a few years and avoid the chair? Yeah, I would take that deal. You would too, wouldn't you? Lepke also thought that that was a very good deal, and he turned himself in like he was asked, where he very quickly found out that no such deal had been struck. No, it was all a set-up. There was no such deal. But it's fine. It's fine. They couldn't prove anything. It's not as if the cops actually had anything on him for all of the murders that he had ordered. Little did Lepke know that the inevitable was finally about to happen, which would create a devastating domino effect. Our boy, Kid Twist Relays, was in a spot of trouble. He had been implicated in a murder, which tends to happen when you murder for a living. And despite having spent almost a decade making rats excruciatingly aware of what happens when you snitch, when he found out that he was pretty much guaranteed to get the Mike Pence treatment, self-preservation kicked in. And Relays talked. Oh, he talked. He didn't even hesitate. He pulled out that hymn sheet and he started fucking singing. He spilled the beans on Lepke, his colleagues, and everyone else involved in Murder Incorporated. He gave them names, dates, locations, everything. Like, everything. As you can probably tell from how this video has gone so far, Riley's account of Murder Incorporated's activities is pretty wild. But he told it with so much detail that the cops immediately believed it. The DA's pursuit of Murder Incorporated immediately went from a Sisyphean effort to shooting fish in a barrel. Relays had just blown the case wide open. Murder Incorporated was fucked. At this point, there was a new district attorney on the scene, a man named William O'Dwyer, who was hell-bent on ending Murder Incorporated once and for all. To this end, he managed to bring down a bunch of low-level mobsters and convince them to rat out their bosses, which led to Albert TikTok Tannenbaum and Seymour Bluejaw Magoon corroborating Relly's story. With the Canaries singing their hearts out, it looked like the state could actually bring the entire operation down. The key players in Murder Incorporated were then all arrested and taken to court, and the death penalty was very much on the table. It was showtime. Up first were Maione and Abendando, who were very quickly convicted of the murder of Whitey Rudnick. However, the duo were lucky enough to get themselves a retrial after an appeal. Maione and Abendando had a second chance to escape the consequences of their actions. However, Reles took to the stand and described how Maione butchered Rudnick with the meat cleaver. This angered Maione, who flew into a rage and chucked a glass of water at Reles while threatening to kill him, which, you know, not a very smart thing to do in the middle of your murder trial. In response, Reles laughed at Maione from the stand, with Maione's hissy fit getting him nowhere. The sore loser and Abendando were convicted for a second time in March of 1941. And then, on the 19th of February 1942, both Maione and Abendando had a little seat on Old Sparky. But Reles wasn't done yet.
Just the way the Count just describes things. Had a seat on Old Sparky. That's freaking awesome. That is freaking awesome. Had a seat on Old Sparky.
He also got Strauss and Goldstein convicted for the murder of Irving Puggy Feinstein that had occurred in 1939. The hit had started as a routine job for the three of them until Feinstein started biting Strauss's finger while Strauss was stabbing him with an ice pick. Now, you can't really fault Feinstein for that because no one likes being murdered. I know, shocking. So it's pretty much a natural reaction to want to fight back. However, Strauss felt greatly disrespected by getting his finger bitten. So he decided that the ice pick was a bit too nice. So he tied a rope around Feinstein's feet, bent them over his back, and then tied the other end of the rope around his neck so that Feinstein was strangled to death. However, this didn't satisfy Strauss, so he also set the body on fire for good measure. Now that sounds absolutely fucking brutal. Surely anyone who could be party to such a horrific act is a complete psychopath with a heart of stone. Or so you would think. You see, it turns out that even the hardest of mobsters have feelings too. Goldstein was so hurt by Reles' betrayal that he cried in court multiple times, especially during the testimony. Strauss, however, could not afford such despair. He had a cunning plan to avoid the chair. A foolproof big brain strategy that was so brilliant that some convicts still try it to this day. An insanity plea. He tried to plead insanity, but he knew that such a daring gambit would be hard to pull off, so he put on a show to make it more convincing. He grew an unusually large beard, mumbled incoherently on the stand, and then chewed on a leather briefcase. It didn't work. Strauss and Goldstein were convicted on the 19th of September 1940.
All that effort. All that effort. He still got a seat on Old Sparky. He went the full extra mile. And where to get him? He still had to sit down.
Their appeal was then rejected on the 24th of April 1941. And then on the 12th of June 1941, both of them also had a little seat on Old Sparky. Conversely, Workman's approach to avoiding the chair was much smarter. He initially fought the charges for the murder of Dutch Schultz until he realised that he was completely fucked because Reles had the goods on him, and also because one of his own defence witnesses recanted their testimony. So, Workman did the smart thing and pled guilty. He was given a life sentence, but he was released on parole after 23 years for his behaviour as a model prisoner. And with that, there was just one more trial to go. The murder of Joe Rosen, for which Lepke, Weiss, Capone, no relation, and Strauss had been indicted. Lepke, Weiss and Capone were convicted on the 30th of November 1941, and Strauss was kind enough to keep the chair warm for them. Now, at this point, I want to point out how calm Lepke looked in all of the pictures taken after his arrest. Because he was fine. Of course he was fine. He was a founding member of the syndicate, and he had friends in very, very high places. He was never going to get the chair for what he did. The syndicate was just going to do what it always did and get him off the charges. Nah, the syndicate completely abandoned everyone. Anyone even associated with Murder Incorporated, the syndicate denied any and all knowledge of them and did not help them in any way because they did not want law enforcement to even maybe think that any of them were associated with Murder Incorporated. The syndicate wanted nothing to do with any of that and completely broke all contact. Murder Incorporated were on their own.
No honor among thieves, right?
Lepke appealed his sentence all the way up to the US Supreme Court, but in the end, all he did was delay the inevitable. There was so much heat on Lepke that eventually he finally fried on the 4th of March 1944, making him the only syndicate leader to ever get the chair. However, he didn't go alone. Weiss and Capone were executed on the same day, but allegedly Lepke also made sure that some rats went down with him, with the disappearance of Blue Jaw Magoon likely being one of the last jobs that he ordered. In the same year, Lepke's partner, Jacob Shapiro, was sentenced to 15 to life for conspiracy and extortion. He had seen the writing on the wall all the way back in April of 1938, and he did the smart thing by turning himself in. Shapiro remained in prison until his death from a heart attack 3 years later. And right until the very end, he always maintained that Murder Incorporated's downfall would never have happened if they had just been allowed to kill Dewey like Dutch asked.
I had a goddamn plan!
Oh, man. And for all anyone knows, he was right. They got rid of the district attorney. Who knows what would have happened? Or maybe it would just made it, it just probably would have made things worse. But hey, the other syndicate leaders came out of this okay.
Incorporated was now done. It was over. And everyone involved had either gone down with the ship or actively played a role in sinking it. Except for one last bastard. The Lord High Executioner himself. Anastasia went into hiding because Reles had tied him to several murders and the cops were after him. Reles, meanwhile, was living it up in the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island while under police protection for obvious reasons. However, while he couldn't wait to testify against Anastasia, it would soon be widely noted that while the canary could sing, it couldn't fly. On the morning of the 12th of November 1941, Reles was found dead after having fallen 7 stories out of the window. You know? Fallen. And
So he got Clintoned. He straight up got Clintoned. Oh, brother.
You are never going to believe what happened. I mean, oh, it was such a terrible accident. Reles was apparently trying to abseil out of the window to freedom, even though he had been granted complete amnesty, while using sheets that had been tied together, and oh, he slipped and he fell to his death. I know, how awful, how terrible, and it's just so tragic that no one tried to stop him because all 5 of his guards had apparently fallen asleep. You know, all at the same time. This is the old school version of, oh sorry, the cameras weren't working. So no one actually saw anything either.
Epstein didn't kill himself. He didn't. He didn't. We all know it.
What a shame. It's so annoying when shit like that happens, isn't it? Reles was due to testify against Anastasia the next day. And the case against Anastasia was built entirely on Reles' testimony. With Reles out of the picture, so were the charges. Anastasia also went through a bit of a rebrand after becoming notable for wearing fedoras, and he became known as the Mad Hatter. The baddest of a bunch of extremely bad guys had gotten away with it. For now. Anastasia continued his career as an underboss in the criminal underworld for the next decade, but he wanted more. He took out his own boss in 1951 and basically went mad with power, brazenly killing anyone that got in his way, leading to a chain of events that mirrored his own rise to the top. You know, it's like poetry, it rhymes. Anastasia had become so ruthless that his relationship with the Commission became outright antagonistic, and several mob bosses knew that something needed to be done about him before a war broke out. So, while having a shave at the Park Sheraton Hotel barbershop, 2 masked men burst in and emptied their guns into Anastasia, bringing one of the Mafia's biggest monsters to a fittingly brutal end. Overall, Murder Incorporated killed so many people that we don't actually know what the exact number is. But the most reliable estimates are between 400 to 1,000 people. Considering the fact that only 7 members went to the chair, a 143 to 1 KD ratio, you know, it's pretty impressive. Inevitably, Murder Incorporated became legendary over time, which led to it inspiring a fair amount of pop culture, including a 1951 gangster movie starring Humphrey Bogart called The Enforcer, and references in The Simpsons and The West Wing. Considering how many brutalised corpses Murder Incorporated left in its wake, it's weird to think that the reason it was founded was to maintain a monopoly on violence within the mafia and actually reduce the number of dead mobsters by keeping whackings neutral and preventing an all-out war. And it very nearly worked. Murder Incorporated ran so efficiently that it was unstoppable for almost a decade, to the point where the only thing that could bring them down was themselves.
Alright. Alright, there we go, y'all. There we go. Count Dankula, Absolute Mad Lads, Murder Incorporated. Bub. Part of it sounds cartoony. Part of it sounds like a Boondock Saints plotline. And part of it does sound like, you know... oh, man. Just crazy, wild, and in some ways nonsensical. But, man. Man. That is something. That's so crazy. Anyway, what did y'all think? Y'all let me know. Y'all let me know. Alright, y'all know what time it is. Y'all know what time it is. You like the video, you like me, you like Count Dankula, you like the content on this channel, then please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Then hit the real subscribe button called the notification bell so you get videos when I post them up. Comment down below which one we'll cover next or what your thoughts are or whatever. Get into the Discord if you want to get directly in touch with me. or send me recommendations. You can do that there as well. And then to keep the channel around past the 30th, please become a member. Again, thank you to the channel members, Annette Fisher, Steve Hughes, The Epic, and Kriegsman. All right, they're still running for the prize, so become a member to be entered. And also to keep the channel around, because if we don't get anywhere by the 30th, the channel's gone. So, and if you just don't care either way, like I'm seeing on the poll, then, yeah, well, it was good while it lasted. Also, make sure you go to the community page on the channel. Okay, vote in that poll. That's the community page on Black Cat Badger's channel. There's a poll I put there to see how many of y'all are any which way. So we will see. That being said, be good. Be safe. Make good life for yourselves. And I will see y'all in the next one. Until then, Black Cat Badger, out.